Hey guys, tonight we begin high, really high on the jagged back of the Andes, where the air feels thin and the silence seems to echo. You're standing on a narrow trail, your breath visible despite the bright sun, your boots crunching gravel as you glance down and keep going. Below you is nothing but mist and terrifying verticality. And above, steps green, carved ancient. Not stairs you can climb, but giant staircases of farmland etched into the sheer mountain face like some divine sculpture. These are the Inca terraces, and tonight you're going to walk among them. You're going to stumble into secrets of soil and stone, see water flow sideways, and realize that engineering isn't about steel and electricity. Sometimes it's about llamas, stars, and chilled potatoes. Just a heads up though, this life, you probably wouldn't survive it. The altitude alone would send most modern folks gasping back to sea level. The workload, brutal. The precision, mind-bending. But it worked for hundreds of years. Without machines, without a written language, without a single iron nail. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere unusual, or even just from bed, drop your location and local time in the comments. It always makes my day. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, your hands grazing the stone walls that hold the earth in place, stone upon stone, stacked so precisely that you'd swear they were laser cut. There's no cement, no glue, nothing sticky holding them together. Just centuries of quiet genius. Historians still argue whether the Inca carved each stone by hand to match its neighbors or shaped them all from the same mental geometry template. Either way, it works. These walls have stood through earthquakes that toppled cathedrals. A bird calls overhead. Below, somewhere far below, you hear a trickle of water and the occasional bleating of a llama. The terraces rise like an amphitheater, green and golden in stripes, each one no more than 2 paces deep, but stretching endlessly along the curve of the mountain. You pass a cluster of ghostly figures. Farmers bent low, pressing seedlings into the dark soil with the calm efficiency of people who've done this every season of their lives. One notices you and grins. You can't help but grin back. Then you notice something weird. None of them are slipping. Even on slopes so steep, they look like walls, their sandals grip like magic. Turns out, they spread llama grease on the soles for traction. Not recommended for your Nikes. The further you go, the more it feels like this place was grown, rather than built. Each terrace edge is capped with stones that look like teeth, slightly rounded, aged, but perfectly aligned. Between some of them, you spot small gaps and realize they're drains. When it rains, the terraces don't flood, they breathe. Water filters down from one level to the next in a gentle cascade, always controlled, always slow. One story you hear from an old man carrying a basket of garlic is that the first terrace builders weren't Inca at all, but their mysterious ancestors, the Wari, or even earlier. The Inca, as great as they were, didn't always invent. Sometimes they just perfected. like taking an old flip phone and turning it into a smartphone. Except instead of apps, you get a potato the size of your head. As you step aside to let a woman pass her back, loaded with a sack of wet soil, you realize the path itself is part of the terrace design. Narrow, but reinforced angled, so the water won't pool and the rocks won't slip. There's even moss encouraged to grow in shady corners to slow runoff and prevent erosion. And all these terraces stacked like emerald bookends on a crumbling cliffside were built by hand. No pulleys, no wheels, just people. Stone, soil, and time. You take a breath. The air is thinner up here, and each inhale feels like sipping air through a straw. Still, there's a strange peace to this altitude, a clarity. Maybe it's the view, or maybe it's just knowing you're walking through a 1,000-year-old machine, made not of gears, but of ground. You wake before dawn, curled beside a crumbling terrace wall, wrapped in a borrowed alpaca wool cloak. The stone beneath you is cold, but the silence is warm, a hush that feels held in the palms of the mountains. Then from somewhere behind the ridgeline comes the first sigh of morning. The sky turns from coal to ember. Shadows soften, and suddenly you can see them, the stones. You shuffle to your feet and wander down the line of a wall. It's almost absurd. Each block fits its neighbors like puzzle pieces, tight, precise, organic. Not square, never square. The Inca didn't do rectangles the way you'd expect. These stones are all odd shapes, some pentagonal, some hexagonal, some that look like they belong in a geology museum. And yet the seams between them are hair-thin. You try sliding a blade of grass into one. No luck. Historians still argue whether this kind of masonry ashlar dry fit was more about earthquake resistance or spiritual perfection. Some say the Inca believed stone was alive, and shaping it was a sacred act. Others say it was just the best way to make things not fall over when the ground started dancing. Probably both. You watch a stonemason at work, well, a reenactor, but still. He doesn't chisel as much as tap. Over and over. Stone on stone. Sandstone hammers, no metal tools. And the sound, it's rhythmic, meditative, like a lullaby for the earth. Tap, rotate, tap again. Each time the rock comes closer to submission, he invites you to try. You fumble, you flatten a finger. You immediately regret every time you laughed at people in ancient documentaries. Then he chuckles and shows you the trick feel where the stone wants to break. The Inca didn't force things. They listened. And the walls? They're not just walls. Some slope backward into the hill. Some bulge slightly at the base. They lean, they breathe, they flex on purpose. Because up here in a land that literally shifts beneath your feet, rigid buildings are the first to fall. The Inca built with motion in mind. Earthquakes weren't the enemy, they were part of the plan. You run your fingers along a stone that's taller than you smoothed from centuries of sun and hands and wind. It's pinkish in hue, veined like marble, heavy as sin. Yet someone, somewhere back in time, dragged it up this cliff, shaved it, shaped it, and set it into place with no mortar, no crane, no blueprint. Just knowing. Here's the real kicker. Many of these stones aren't even from here. Geologists have matched some to quarries dozens of kilometers away, which means people not only shaped these monsters, but carried them without wheels. over ravines, through jungle, across rivers. If you're imagining long lines of grunting workers with ropes and sleds, you're probably right. Though one fringe theory suggests they may have used frozen llama fat as a lubricant. Gross, but practical. You stumble across a corner where the wall folds into a small chamber. Maybe a shrine. Maybe a granary. Historians still debate the exact purpose of these outcrops. Were they for ritual? For storage? For hiding snacks from your nosy neighbor? The truth is, we just don't know. What you do know is that none of this feels accidental. The angles, the slope, even the gaps between terraces deliberate. To slow erosion. To let wind pass through. To let sound echo in strange ways. Some Inca sites whisper back when you speak. You try it. Hello. And sure enough, the hillside answers with a faint playful hello. You laugh alone, standing halfway up a mountain with a view that could humble gods. That's when you see it. A tiny, impossibly flat ledge up near the next ridge. It's another terrace, narrow, sharp-edged, clearly carved, impossibly high. And you suddenly understand something. These people weren't just growing food. They were proving that nature could be tamed. That the earth, as steep and brutal as it was, could still be shaped to human needs with patience, with reverence, and with an absurd amount of stone. You follow a barefoot teenager up one of the narrower staircuts between terraces' stone steps no wider than your feet, each one worn smooth by 1,000 years of climbing. She's carrying a shallow basket balanced on her head, and you notice it's brimming with something unexpected dirt. Not just any dirt, though. This is rich, dark valley bottom soil. The kind that squishes, not crumbles. The kind you smell before you see. And that's when it hits you. This soil doesn't belong here. You're over 11,000 feet above sea level. The natural ground is dry, rocky, lean, more suited to shrubs and lichens than maize or squash. So how exactly is this lush garden, sprouting corn stalks taller than you and beans thick as your fingers? Simple. Someone carried the dirt here, all of it. The Inca, and likely the Wari and others before them, built each terrace like a cake. Bottom layer, chunky rocks for drainage. Then pebbles. Then gravel. Then coarse sand. Then that gorgeous black earth brought up in baskets just like the one you're watching. Sway on the teen's head. Historians still argue how far some of it traveled. Estimates range from a few valleys over to entire ecological zones. Either way, it wasn't a short walk. You trail behind your thighs burning and realize this was agriculture with a vengeance. Not just planting in what's available, but engineering fertility where none existed. At the edge of one terrace, a barefoot man grins and invites you to dig. You kneel and plunge your fingers into the soil. It's warm, spongy, alive, and weirdly, it holds moisture, even though it hasn't rained in days. That's the magic of the layering. It soaks up water like a sponge and feeds it back to the roots. He lifts a clump of dirt and crumbles it between his fingers. Smells like good soup, he jokes, which is oddly accurate. There's a scent earthy vegetal, faintly sweet. Then he gestures to a pile of dried grass and llama dung nearby. The Inca's secret sauce. You help him spread the mix across the beds. Guano from seabirds, llama droppings, dried plants, and even the occasional crushed fish bone. It's not glamorous, but it works. And it shows something profound. High-altitude farming wasn't an act of desperation. It was a system, a deliberate, beautiful, slightly smelly system. You pause to glance at the terraces above and below. Every level is flat, precisely engineered to catch runoff, slow erosion, and trap sediment. These aren't just gardens, they're platforms of survival. One fringe theory you've heard, completely unproven mind you, is that some terrace walls were seed libraries, that certain shapes or cracks might have been used to hide or cool seeds between harvests. A lovely idea, even if probably romanticized. Still, you do find something hidden in the cracks. Not seeds, but shells, small polished ones tucked deep between stones. Offerings maybe, or remnants of rituals to Pachamama, the Earth Mother. She was always watching, they said. So best to tuck a thank you note in the walls now and then. Your new friend leads you to a thin wooden post beside the field. Tied to the top is a piece of colored yarn fluttering in the breeze. He explains that it's a marker, part of a visual system to track what was planted when and where. No written language, remember. So they used color placement, even knots in string, to manage data. A spreadsheet made of wool. You squat in the shade for a break and watch the clouds roll by so close you feel like you could pluck one. You imagine hauling just one basket of soil up here and immediately get tired. Then remember, someone did that hundreds of times, for hundreds of terraces, for hundreds of years. And the result is this, an impossible garden in the sky. Not because nature gave it to them, but because someone decided they wouldn't accept gravity's rules. You're walking along a channel no wider than your foot, carved directly into the mountainside. It gleams in the morning light, shimmering like a silver thread unraveled from the sun itself. The water runs fast, but silent, guided along an impossibly gentle slope, never pooling, never rushing. You squat beside it and dip your fingers in. Cold as meltwater. Because it is meltwater. This is the Inca's secret. They didn't just use water, they domesticated it. High above you, somewhere between the snow line and the clouds, is a lake or glacier or spring. The Inca found it. They mapped it. Then they tamed it with an endless series of open-air canals, amunas, that snake across cliffs, wind through forests, and wrap entire mountains. No pumps. No dams. Just gravity and geometry. You follow the channel's path as it hugs every curve of the slope like a dancer, never missing a step. Every once in a while, a break appears, a stone notch, or a hollowed-out basin. You realize these aren't flaws. They're valves, spillways, overflows, maybe even ancient moisture sensors. Historians still argue whether the Inca had standardized design templates or improvised each build. Either way, it works. The path leads to a sunken field, a small depression carved into a terrace, lined with river stones. It's a cochacochin, a holding pond. You sit beside it and watch the water swirl, then vanish into an underground drain. Not wasted, just redistributed. Somewhere down below, a root is drinking because of this. You notice a patch of bright green growing around the pond, thicker, richer than the fields above. That's no accident. The Inca used these little ponds to moderate temperature and humidity. In the dry season, they acted as reservoirs. In the rainy season, as buffers. They even help protect crops from frost. And that's when your guide points to something subtle, a set of vertical grooves along the wall. At first you think erosion, but then you see the pattern. It's a measurement system, like an ancient rain gauge. He runs his finger along the lowest mark. If the water drops below here, he says, we plant something different. You blink. He just described adaptive agriculture, without charts, without Excel, just eyes and rocks. Further down, you find a series of Connaught subterranean canals that channel water from uphill springs to lower terraces. You crawl partway inside one. It's cool, damp, fragrant with moss, and just audible above the water's whisper is the faint thunk, thunk, thunk of a wooden diversion gate ticking in rhythm. Not a machine, just careful carpentry and gravity. One fringe theory suggests that Inca engineers used sound to monitor flow-placing carved stones in waterways that would hum or gurgle at different pitches, like a primitive leak detector. It sounds like fantasy, but the acoustics in some canals do change as water levels shift. Who knows? Maybe their ears were their best sensors. You pass a woman adjusting a miniature sluice gate with a stick. She's laughing at a soaked guinea pig that's fallen into the channel. Apparently, he's a repeat offender. She shoos him out, muttering something about him being cursed by the water spirits. You wonder if she's joking. Probably. But then again, the Inca didn't separate science from spirit. Every canal, every drop, was a gift from the mountain gods. It had to be guided, honored, and never wasted. As the sun climbs higher, the channels glint like threads across the slopes, linking field to field, family to family. It's not just plumbing, it's community. Water was scheduled, shared, and measured not by pipe and pump, but by trust and tradition. You find a stone bench carved beside a three-way junction where one channel splits like a trident. It's shady here. Cool. You sit watching the forks bubble and flow, each branch winding off toward a different crop. Potatoes left. Quinoa right. Corn straight ahead. No one yells. No one hurries. The water just knows where to go. Or rather, the people knew how to guide it. And in that quiet, with a view of green terraces stacked like the pages of a giant stone book, you realize the Inca didn't just build in the mountains. They taught the mountains how to farm. You're kneeling beside a terrace wall, rubbing your palm along the mossy stone, when you notice something odd. The rocks are wet. Not soaked, but slick. Cool. Breathing. You press your ear close and hear nothing. Just silence and stone. But still, the wall seems alive somehow. That's when your guide crouches beside you and says, "They built these to sweat." You blink at him. Then he explains, "The Inca didn't just build terraces that held soil. They built terraces that breathed. Each layer, from the foundation boulders to the topsoil, was designed to drain, aerate, and self-regulate. When rain falls, the water doesn't flood. It's wicked downward and outward slowly. When the sun bakes the land, the terraces trap coolness in their cores, shielding crops from the worst heat. And in the chill of the Andean night, they release that stored warmth back into the soil. You tap your finger against a stone, then another. Some are darker, some drier. Each terrace has its own thermal rhythm, its own pulse. A living skin stretched across the ribs of the mountain. Historians still argue whether the Inca understood thermodynamics in a modern sense. Probably not. But they knew the patterns, and they played them like music. The man beside you picks up a handful of dirt, presses it into a ball, and tosses it. It thuds a sign it's perfectly moist. Not too wet, not too dry. The wall tells you, he says. Just listen. You walk further and spot a strange design. The terrace wall here is slightly curved, like a gentle wave. And instead of uniform blocks, the stones are all jagged, mismatched, but perfectly locked together. Turns out this is anti-earthquake engineering. When the ground shakes, and it will, the wall flexes. The stones shift, slightly absorb the energy, then settle back. Modern engineers have tried to replicate this dry masonry technique, and some of their simulations suggest the walls are more resilient than many modern structures. One fringe paper even proposes that certain terrace designs amplify minor quakes' upward warning resonance before the real shake hits. Like nature's doorbell. Intriguing? Absolutely. Proven not yet. You sit beneath a gnarled tree, its roots gripping a wall like ancient fingers. Above, hummingbirds flit through flowering quinoa plants. Below, water trickles from a hidden drain, the sound like a lazy clock ticking. Time seems thick here, sticky, slow, dependable. A group of kids runs past, laughing their sandals, slapping stone. One stops and shouts back at you, pointing. That wall there, it's older than my abuelita's ghost. You chuckle, not entirely sure if he's joking. Around here, ancestors are rarely just stories. They're participants. You pass a section under repair where 3 workers are resetting a collapsed section of wall. No cement, no glue. Just careful hands, local stone, and a deep understanding of balance. You watch them work in silence for a while, then notice something unexpected. The terrace behind them is still growing crops. Even with the wall damaged, the land continues to feed. Why? Because each wall isn't load-bearing in the modern sense. It's part of a system. Each layer supports the others. Failure in one part doesn't mean collapse. It just means you fix it. Slowly. Together. One woman waves you over and hands you a tool. A wooden wedge wrapped in llama hide. You help press a stone into place, guided by murmured instructions. It fits snug. You grin. She nods. Now it breathes again. You stand back and look across the valley. Terraces ripple down the hills like stacked green combs, each one breathing, draining, storing. Together, they are not just farms. They are a climate system, a man-made biome. And you, clumsy, sunburned, out of breath, you just helped it exhale. You pause to catch your breath on a grassy ledge, and that's when you hear the soft shuffle of hooves, llamas moving like old men in a library. They crest the hill beside you, flanked by 2 handlers in woven tunics and sun-faded hats. The lead llama blinks at you with noble indifference. The one behind it sneezes on your shoe. Transportation Inca style. These creatures are more than adorable alpaca cousins with questionable manners. They were the backbone of the entire terrace farming operation. The Inca had no wheels. No draft animals like oxen or horses. So when you wanted to move soil seed fertilizer tools or even stones, llamas did the heavy lifting. But don't get too excited. They're not beasts of burden in the modern sense. Each llama can carry maybe 30 to 40 kilos before throwing a dramatic tantrum. Pack too much, and they'll simply sit down and refuse to move. Not out of exhaustion, just out of attitude. So managing them wasn't about brute strength. It was about logistics, and a lot of llamas. Historians still argue how deeply integrated llamas were into terrace agriculture. Some say they were mostly for transport between communities. Others point to evidence that herds were rotated, with the crops grazing above, fertilizing below. Portable composters with hooves and fluff. You follow the caravan as it zigzags down a narrow trail, one that hugs the terraces so tightly you have to flatten yourself against a wall when a particularly plump llama waddles past. Each pack is carefully balanced baskets of dried manure seed sacks, clay jugs sloshing with chicha. One even carries a bundle of colorful ropes and knotted strings quipus, which you'll get to later. The driver taps a wooden panpipe as they walk, not so much to direct the animals as to maintain rhythm. The music is simple, repetitive, almost hypnotic. It keeps your feet moving even as your legs begin to rebel. Eventually, you reach a way station, a shaded rest spot carved into the mountainside where llamas are unloaded and fed. You sit on a low stone bench, sipping bitter tea from a gourd, while a handler explains how each terrace zone had a network of these stations. Part motel, part warehouse, part gossip center. He shows you the system llama routes ran parallel to the canals and terrace paths, ensuring water, soil, and cargo could all move in tandem. They even timed planting and harvest schedules around herd availability. You nod, impressed. This wasn't just farming, it was networked farming. And the herders, they weren't farmers exactly. They were part of a specialized caste. People trained from childhood to read weather patterns, navigate footpaths, and keep llamas calm during rock slides. You meet one, a leathery woman with a braided belt and the most expressive eyebrows you've ever seen. She shows you her route map, embroidered, not drawn. Each trail stitched in colored thread, each station marked with a tiny geometric glyph. It's not just beautiful, it's functional. Waterproof, foldable, chew-resistant. Take that GPS. One fringe theory you overhear from a passing tourist, you're not the only one out here after all, is that certain llama routes corresponded with celestial alignments. That caravans moved not just across the land, but in sync with the stars. Sounds poetic. Also sounds like something you could make a documentary about, with a dramatic voiceover and some pan flute music. Before you head back, you watch a young boy help strap a load to the most decorated llama in the group. This one's pack is fringed with dyed yarn and tiny bells. She's lucky, he says. She carries seed. You ask why that's special. He shrugs. If she trips, maybe the mountain gets a new garden. You smile. Even accidents here are invitations to grow. And as the caravan vanishes around the bend, bells jingling, dust rising, you realize you've just seen the circulatory system of an empire. Not paved roads or copper wires, but llamas and rope and rhythm. You clamber up a slightly steeper path, now your calves grumbling when the terraces ahead begin to look different, subtly so. Same stonework, same neatly layered soil, but the crops not uniform. Here, onions sprout beside wild herbs. There, maize climbs alongside potatoes. Further still, you spot patches of squash with their curling vines brushing against stalks of quinoa. It's a checkerboard of diversity microclimates, your guide whispers, as if uttering a secret. One slope, 20 gardens. You step onto a narrow ledge and immediately feel the shift in air. Just 10 meters up, and suddenly the wind is cooler, the soil firmer underfoot, and a faint mist clings to your sleeves. Each terrace isn't just a level, it's a climate zone curated and cultivated. Some warm, others cool. Some shaded, others sun-soaked. And each tailored to a different crop's needs. Historians still argue whether the Inca discovered this through long trial and error or had some formal botanical science. What's certain is that they understood how to tweak altitude angle and orientation to simulate completely different growing environments, all on the same mountain. You kneel beside a woman tending to tubers. She smiles and lifts a root like a gnarled hand, oka sharp and lemony, when raw, soft, and nutty when cooked. She points to the sun, then the slope. 2 hours more light here. That's why okay, not up there. You glance higher. That next terrace, faba beans. Below, lettuces. Across the way, chili peppers. It's not chaos. It's strategy. Even the wall colors play a role. Darker stones retain more heat, warming soil through the night. Some farmers even use reflective slates to direct sunlight to sensitive crops. Makeshift solar panels. A few centuries early, you pause beside a dusty ledger kept under a stone ledge. Smooth boards of wood, with symbols scratched in rows. Planting records, rainfall guesses yield notes. Modern archaeologists debate whether the Inca had scientists in the formal sense, but after seeing this, you're convinced they had data and they knew how to use it. A boy runs past with a slingshot and a pouch of pebbles. You flinch. Surely not wildlife control. He grins and points to the sky. Parrots. Then adds deadpan. They like corn. We don't like them. Fair enough. As you stroll farther, the planting patterns begin to reveal another layer experimentation. Some terraces have unusual groupings, beans with mint maize next to cactus. Companion planting long before anyone gave it a fancy name. And this wasn't just for yield. Some plants warded off pests. Others shaded roots. Still others signaled soil health based on their color or size. You pass an older man who's gently nudging stones beside a flowering bush. He's adjusting drainage, he says. If the water lingers, the roots rot. If it rushes, the topsoil goes with it. And here's the kicker. He does it by feel. Centuries of experience passed through hands, not books. One fringe theory. A few scholars believe these farmers didn't just plant crops. They calibrated terraces with test rows before each season, mini gardens that acted like climate barometers. If those rows thrived, they expanded. If not, they adapted. Farming, yes, but also feedback loops. You step to the edge of one terrace and look out. A valley unfolds below, like an ancient spreadsheet, rows and columns of green and gold, each cell reflecting someone's hope, someone's decision. It's stunning. It's smart. It's soft power made edible. And as you sip a handful of water from a passing channel, you realize something quiet, but staggering. This was never just subsistence. It was mastery. The sun climbs higher now, casting sharp angles across the stonework, and you feel the heat shift. Up here, everything is about timing. You lean against a low terrace wall, watching a group of farmers gather in a semicircle around a slightly elevated patch. At first, it looks like they're just chatting, but then you realize They're debating where to plant potatoes. That seems simple, until you hear what they're considering. This side gets more wind, but less dew, one says. But the slope angle here holds more warmth. After sunset, adds another. And the shadow from that ridge hits by 2 p.m. Now, says a third, checking the sun like a human sundial. They're not arguing emotionally. They're calculating each drawing from years of lived knowledge passed down through calloused fingers and patient observation. It's like watching a team of meteorologists, geologists, and botanists disguised as humble farmers. Historians still argue whether the Inca had formal agricultural schools or if everything was learned in the fields. What's clear is their decisions were rarely random. They measured with the stars. They recorded in string, and they trusted their terrain more than textbooks. You step closer as the debate ends. The verdict. Potato. Rows staggered in a curved pattern to account for slope drainage and airflow. A woman begins marking the soil with a stick, and you see her outline the curve like a sculptor. Nothing linear, nothing rushed. She hands you a few of the finger-like tubers and gestures for you to help plant. The soil is cool beneath your fingers. The potatoes are firm and earthy, their skins blushed pink and purple like bruised knuckles. Here she says, pointing to the left, wind hits less hard. They'll sleep better, sleep better. You pause, then realize it's not metaphor. Plants here do sleep. Temperature and wind determine how much energy they use at night. One wrong guess, and the harvest suffers. Even the smallest factors are treated like co-authors in a long, wordless manuscript. Later, you find a chalky cliff face with dozens of notches carved into it, not for decoration. These are sunlight markers, solstice lines, crop calendars. They track shadows, not time. Farmers watched where the light landed and matched it to planting patterns. If the shadow falls on that notch by midday, it's time to sow quinoa. If not, wait another week. One fringe theory even suggests the Inca embedded these solar cues into terrace placement itself, that each rise and fall in the farming matrix aligned with key celestial markers. Think Stonehenge, but edible. You walk the length of one terrace that angles ever so slightly to the east. Your guide grins. Sun wakes it up faster. On this slope, crops germinate just days earlier than the ones opposite. And when you're trying to survive an altitude frost, those days matter. Near the edge, a few kids are playing with hollow reeds, blowing into them and tossing pebbles inside. One pipe sounds high-pitched, another low and warm. You ask what they're doing. One shrugs and says they're singing to the plants. You chuckle. But then a woman nearby nods solemnly. It helps, she says. They know we're near. It's sweet. It's odd. But then again, modern research does show plants react to vibration, to care, even to footsteps. Maybe the Incas didn't know the science. Maybe they didn't care. What mattered was the result. As the planting finishes, the group places a few coca leaves at the corner of the terrace. A small ritual, quiet and reverent. Not religion as you know it, just thanks. The earth gives, so you give back. You sit down brushing dust from your pants and realize your concept of farming will never be the same. Here, agriculture isn't seasonal labor. It's symphony. Soil, wind, stone, sun, frost, human. each one a player, each terrace a note. Night falls suddenly in the Andes, like someone pulling a thick wool blanket over the sky. One moment, you're squinting in the amber light. The next, you're under a dome of stars, so vast and sharp they feel almost loud. You lie back on a cool stone bench near the edge of a terrace, pulling your cloak tighter, listening to crickets trill in rhythms only they understand. And then you hear its soft murmurs, footsteps, the rustle of cloth. A few meters away, a man in a tunic settles beside a low fire pit and begins setting out something curious. A bundle of cords, a handful of seeds, a flat stone board, and a set of carefully carved star maps etched into polished wood. He's not a priest, not exactly. He's a sake keeper, a kind of ritual agronomist, part astronomer, part farmer, part poet. And tonight, he's planning the next planting cycle by watching the sky. You sit cross-legged beside him as he begins tracing a finger across constellations you barely recognize. Not Orion or the Big Dipper, but the llama, the toad, the fox. All dark constellations formed not by stars, but by the shadowy gaps between them. Only the Andean night sky does that, teaches you to read negative space. See the dark patch there, he says, pointing just beneath the Milky Way's shimmer. That's where the river comes from. You nod, pretending to see it. He smiles and keeps explaining. The Inca didn't just use the stars for navigation. They used them as clocks. When a certain shape appeared at a certain angle above a certain mountain, it meant start preparing the soil. When another dipped below the horizon, it meant harvest soon or risk frost. Historians still debate whether this was widespread practice or limited to ritual centers, but one thing is clear: it was real, practical, lived. He pulls a coca leaf from a pouch and places it on the board just beside a carved alpaca. Tomorrow, quinoa, he mutters. The moon says it's ready. You raise an eyebrow. The moon says, he laughs. It always has. You ask about the cords, the quipu. He unrolls it carefully. Strings of all colors, lengths, and knots dangle like a jellyfish in low firelight. Each one carries meaning, dates, quantities, phases, weather. Some even theorize they held narrative information, maybe even stories or names. A fringe theory you've read suggests quipus could encode data in base 10, like a binary abacus with strings. The more you stare, the more plausible it feels. He lifts one strand and says, "Last year the rain came late. The knots here." He trails off, letting the cords swing. You realize they're not just records. They're reminders felt, not just read. The fire crackles low. He sprinkles something on it, sweet-smelling herbs, maybe sage. Smoke curls upward and blends into the starlight. Then he leans back and points again. That line, he says, is where the ancestors walk. You look, you see nothing, and then you do. A pale path across the sky. The Milky Way, cutting the night in half like a silver river. In Inca cosmology, it mirrored the Urubamba, the sacred river below. They believed souls traveled along it, and that farming wasn't just feeding bodies, it was feeding the cycle. A nearby child begins humming. Another joins. Soon the terrace hums with low voices, soft and slow. Not quite a song, not quite a prayer. Just something old, something that's been done here for centuries whenever the stars come out to give advice. And you lying beneath the breath of the mountains, suddenly feel very small, but not alone, because even now, this high, this far, this deep in time, someone is still listening to the sky, waiting for the green world to wake again. The morning is brittle with cold. Frost clings to the terraces like a silver film, and your breath spills out in clouds. You wiggle your fingers inside your cloak and shuffle toward a small group gathered in the pre-dawn dark. No one's talking. Everyone's waiting. Then, with a nod from an older man, you recognize him from the star-watching circle they begin. First, they lift the baskets of potatoes. Wait, frozen potatoes? That's exactly what you're looking at. Knobby little roots, stiff as stones covered in frost. They dump them on a flat slab and start stomping. Yes, stomping. You blink unsure if this is some pre-coffee hallucination. But sure enough, each person takes a turn, stepping barefoot on the frozen tubers, squeezing out moisture as they mash them flat. It looks absurd. It is absurd. But it's also genius. Because this is how the Inca made chuño freeze-dried potatoes that could last for years, possibly decades. Here's how it works. High-altitude nights freeze the spuds solid. The next day, people stomp out the liquid. Then they leave them in the sun. Repeat the process for a few days, and voila, light, dry, nearly immortal food. No preservatives, no smoke, no fire. Just science and sandals. Historians agree this method may be one of the oldest food preservation techniques still in use. Fringe theories even claim that certain state storehouses still had edible chuño centuries after the Spanish arrived. You pick one up. It's hard, wrinkled, weighs almost nothing. You take a cautious bite. It's earthy, a little sour. Not bad, honestly. And shockingly filling. The man beside you chuckles. That one's young, only from last year. You eye your basket with newfound respect. Chuño wasn't just a snack. It was survival. In seasons of drought or frost, it fed armies, pilgrims, and cities. Entire warehouse networks were stocked with the stuff built into mountain cliffs, disguised in dry caves, sealed with rituals. It was part of a sophisticated food security system. No other ancient empire matched at this altitude. After the stomping, you help spread the flattened potatoes across woven mats. A young girl shows you how to lay them, facing the sun, so they dry faster. But don't turn bitter. She sounds like she's quoting her grandmother, who probably quoted hers. Then comes the next phase, bundling. Once dry, the chuño is packed tightly into reed baskets and stored in cool, dark places. Terrace vaults, roofed granaries, even stone chests carved into the hillside. You peek inside, one rows upon rows of dried goods stacked neatly beside dried fish, beans, salt. It smells like dust and garlic, but in a good way. You ask, who decides what goes where? The answer, everyone. Storage wasn't just a task, it was a communal responsibility. Each household contributed. Each terrace had a quota. Even the layout followed rules. Chuño on the upper shelves, cooler herbs on the lower dryer. And some granaries had clever ventilation built into the stone itself, keeping airflow steady even in hot months. One boy points out a painted symbol on the wall. White spiral inside a circle. That one means it's blessed, he whispers. Protected from mice and greedy cousins. You laugh, then remember what happened to your secret snack stash back in school. Some things never change. You spend the rest of the morning kneeling in the sun, surrounded by soft bundles and warm voices, your hands covered in potato starch. The air smells faintly of dust and mint. Every few minutes, someone passes by and hums. Not a tune, just a tone, a rhythm. Something to keep time. Something to remember the weight of old work. And as the sun rises fully and casts long shadows across the terraced walls, you feel it again, that blend of science and spirit. These people weren't just freezing potatoes. They were building resilience. Brick by brick, step by step, spud by spud, you feel the first tremor in your feet. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle shift, like the mountain exhaling beneath you. A bird takes off in alarm. Somewhere a llama snorts. The locals barely react. The earth is moving. You freeze not out of fear, but confusion. You're standing on a stack of giant stone planters, carved into a mountainside, and the ground is shaking. You brace yourself. Expect cracking. Expect collapse. Expect disaster. It doesn't come. Instead, the terraces sway, just a little, like a boat riding out a distant wave. Then stillness. You exhale. The terraces stand. The stone walls hold. Nothing breaks. No landslides. No panic. Just resilience. And once again, you're reminded the Inca planned for this. Historians still debate how much earthquake knowledge the Inca possessed scientifically. But functionally, they were masters. Every wall, every foundation, every drainage channel built with seismic shifts in mind. They used trapezoidal doorways, inclined walls, and interlocking stones, not because it looked nice, though it does, but because the design works. It flexes, it absorbs, it survives. You wander downhill, tracing a terrace wall with your hand. The stones aren't cemented, they just fit, and that's the secret. Inca walls don't crack under pressure, they wiggle. During a quake, the vibrations move through the stones like ripples through a net. The gaps compress and release. Energy travels, then fades. One fringe theory even suggests that terrace dimensions were tuned to resonate at certain frequencies, meaning some could cancel out quake energy entirely, like noise-canceling headphones. It's unproven, but intriguing, especially when you consider how many sites Machu Picchu, Ollantaytambo, Pisac remain standing, while modern concrete crumbles around them. You pass a section of collapsed modern homes near the valley floor. The contrast is sharp. Adobe shattered, roofs caved, dust clinging to mango trees. In the distance, an Inca wall still stands grimy, mossy, but upright. You meet a mason there inspecting the old structure. He runs a hand over the stones. "This wall breathes," he says. "New ones don't." He explains that terrace foundations are built like sandwiches, giant stones below, medium stones in the middle, gravel, and sand on top. Each layer compresses differently. So when the earth shivers, the load shifts, gradually dissipated instead of resisted. You nod, then ask him if this was genius or accident. He shrugs. "The mountain taught us." We listened. A little farther on, you find something stranger. Small, perfectly round boulders, hidden inside a few terrace walls. They're about the size of a melon, wedged in between flat stones. You ask what they are. Shock absorbers, someone guesses. Another says counterweights. A third says offerings. Historians still argue about their purpose, and maybe the truth is all of the above. But whatever they are, they've stayed where they were placed, silent, still steady. Back at a nearby field, a woman adjusts a cracked irrigation channel. The quake shifted one of the feeder stones, causing a trickle to go rogue. She taps it back with her sandal and returns to planting. No stress, no drama, just maintenance. That's what sticks with you. Not just the engineering, but the attitude. Here, quakes are part of life. Not feared, not ignored, just accounted for. Like wind, like frost, like time. You sit on a stone outcrop as the sun dips behind a peak, casting long violet shadows across the valley. The terraces glow amber in the fading light, stacked like sleeping vertebrae up the spine of the earth. And you realize resilience wasn't an add-on. It was the design. The Inca didn't just farm the mountains, they made the mountains farm-proof. You wake the next morning to the smell of toasted maize and wood smoke drifting on the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a conch shell horn blares long, low, like the mountain calling its people to attention. You follow the sound to the next ridge, where you stumble into something remarkable, a storehouse. Not a tourist stop, not a ruin, but an actual functioning depot, stone-walled, thatch-roofed, and humming with activity. This is Colca country, the ancient granaries of the Inca. And yes, they're still in use. The building is cool inside, shaded and dry, despite the morning sun. You see rows of chuño baskets, stacked waist-high bundles of dried herbs tied to rafters, and dozens of clay jars sealed with tight woven fiber lids. A woman waves you over and shows you what's inside: corn kernels, beans, dried meat, charqui, shredded and smoked, all still fresh, all ready to feed dozens, maybe hundreds. She grins. Tax day. Wait, taxes. She nods. We pay the empire with food. You quickly learn that Inca terrace farming wasn't just about feeding your family. It was about feeding the state. Each community had tribute quotas, harvest portions allocated for soldiers, priests, builders, and those who couldn't farm. These goods were gathered and stored in kolkishis, then distributed based on need. Not coin, not currency calories. Historians still argue how centralized this system was. Some claim it rivaled any old-world bureaucracy. Others believe it worked mostly on local reciprocity. What's certain is no empire in the ancient world stored food with more forethought. The Inca treated grain like gold and granaries like banks. You tour the network. These aren't just huts. They're engineering marvels, sloped floors for airflow ventilation windows aligned with prevailing winds, and raised foundations to keep out rodents. Some even had coded symbols etched into the walls. Inventory markers, perhaps. Others may have been guarded ritually, with blessings and offerings placed at each corner. And they're everywhere. Dotting cliffs, nestled into hillsides, hidden in cloud forests, some perched so high they'd make your ankles cry. Yet someone made the effort, because storing food far above the pests and moisture was worth it. You reach the rear of one storehouse and find a dusty stone ledger, rows of tallies carved directly into the wall. One fringe theory suggests each line corresponds to a planting season. Another claims these walls were like barcode scanners for messengers. Quipu. Runners would count, lines read knots, and relay inventory status between towns. Instant data transmission, 15th century style. Out front, a team is unloading fresh supplies. One young man is carrying armfuls of bright red peppers. Another holds a goat, looking deeply offended about the whole thing. A third balances a basket on her head, filled with dried herbs and something that smells suspiciously like fermented potatoes. This one's for Cusco, they explain. Big feast day. You watch as everything is sorted and weighed not on scales, but by feel, by volume, by years of ancestral math. No calculators, just muscle memory and well-trained hands. Every parcel is recorded with a quip-u knots, tied colors, chosen lengths measured. A story in string. You sit with one of the keepers, an elderly man with a sun-cracked face and more gray hair than teeth. He explains that each village rotates responsibility. When your time comes, you serve the mountain by keeping its belly full. He pats a jar lovingly. This one has been here since my son was born. We only open it when the frost bites, not a backup, a promise. And you realize this wasn't just empire logistics. This was emotional insurance. Each kolka said we've got you. Whether war comes or drought or pestilence, we'll eat. You walk away, carrying a single dried fig gifted to you by a smiling girl who insists this one is lucky. You're not sure if she means the fig or you, but either way, you feel it. You wander into a quieter corner of the village terraces now, where the fields narrow and the chatter fades into murmurs. Here, beneath a canopy of drying maize husks and wind-fluttering reeds, a small group of women gathers around a stone-lined canal. One is knitting. Another adjusts a bundle of herbs. A third, barefoot focused, leans over the water, watching it trickle through a narrow gate. Then she reaches for a bundle of knotted cords, a quipu, and makes a subtle adjustment. One tug, one loop, one slip knot. The others nod. The gate opens a little wider. You've stumbled into the operations center of the terrace water schedule, and the engineers here are women. Not a surprise once you learn how labor was divided in Inca society. Women weren't just helpers or field hands, they were managers, especially of the most sacred commodity, water. And nowhere is that more evident than here, in the act of balancing flow between crops. The Yanapa tradition. Communal aid meant that work was shared across households, but irrigation was sacredly precise. Who gets how much water, for how long, and when these decisions weren't made with brute force or hierarchy, they were made with consensus and cord. One of the women invites you to hold the quipu. It's surprisingly heavy, and the knots are rough on your skin. You try to make sense of it. Long strands, short strands, different colors, tied in spirals or loops or clusters. Historians still argue how to decode them fully. Some say it was pure math base 10 recording of time and quantities. Others believe there were narrative or symbolic elements, stories woven into the strands. One fringe theory you read suggests certain water quippas were tactile calendars guiding not only irrigation, but planting dates, ceremonies, even birth rituals. Today's scholars are still translating them patiently, slowly, knot by knot. You sit beside the women and observe their rhythm. One watches the sun's position. Another listens to the sound of water over stone, softer now, signaling saturation. A third gently tugs a reed plug from another canal. The water shifts direction like a well-trained animal. They keep no watches, no apps, just ears, sky, and string. A young girl arrives with a clay jug balanced on her hip and a half-finished quipu in the other hand. She's learning, marking a shift in the water flow with a practiced knot. The older woman nods, no words needed. Knowledge transferred. just like that. Nearby, a small shrine catches your eye. 3 stones stacked under a bent reed arch, a few dried coca leaves pressed beneath them. A water offering. You bow slightly as you pass. Even now, even centuries later, the reverence remains. As you explore deeper, you see how the irrigation paths twist and layer like veins, some visible, some hidden under stone slabs. At key points, the women have placed polished stones that sing. When water brushes past them, each one a different pitch. If a stream goes silent, they know it's blocked. Who needs sensors when you have sound? You crouch beside a shallow ditch and run your fingers through the current. It's cool and clear, flowing with ease and purpose. Somewhere downstream, a terrace of maize breathes in that moisture. Somewhere upstream, a cloud shadows a melt-fed spring. And in between, these women are conducting the flow with fingers and fiber. You help carry a basket of wet reeds to a drying rack. The air smells of riverbanks and damp clay. A baby snores in a sling nearby, gently rocked by the motion of a mother who is also reciting seed types aloud as she ties them into small pouches. Everything here is interwoven. Literally, you glance at the canal system once more. It's elegant, balanced, ancient, and entirely managed by women whose tools are chords, rhythm, and trust. And you think, forget aqueducts. This is engineering. You hear them before you see them boots. Not sandals, not bare feet. Boots. Clanking, marching, scraping boots. You crest the hill and look down into a village frozen mid-harvest. Children hide behind drying racks. Farmers pause in the fields. Even the llamas seem tense. And through the center of the silence march strangers in metal helmets, sun flashing off steel and silver. Their faces pale and unreadable. The Spanish have arrived. At first, they don't understand the terraces. They mistake them for ceremonial steps or tombs. But soon, they see the food, the irrigation, the abundance, and they realize this isn't just a mountain, it's a machine, and they want it. You follow from a distance, keeping to the edges as the newcomers wander through the fields. One pokes at the stone walls with his sword. Another kicks a chuño basket. One tries to uproot a canal stone and ends up soaked in muddy water. You don't laugh. No one does. Historians still argue how quickly the terrace systems began to fall after the Spanish conquest. Some say within a generation. Others argue fragments survived far longer. But the truth is heartbreakingly simple. The system depended on people. And when those people were displaced, enslaved, or killed, the terraces couldn't hold. You pass a destroyed aqueduct stones scattered like broken teeth across the hillside. A field lies dry, beside it, cracked and silent. Further down, a half-collapsed kolka spills its contents, quinoa maize smashed pots. It feels like a body exhumed, and the air is full of that dry, sour smell of abandonment. The conquerors never fully understood what they were breaking. They saw fields. They missed the networks. They saw walls. They missed the agreements. They saw stored food and thought of plunder, not planning. You visit a terrace where the stones have begun to slide. No maintenance. No caretakers. Without constant touch, the walls begin to unlearn their shape. A local elder sighs as he kneels by the rubble. The mountain remembers, he says, but it forgets too. if you let it. He presses a piece of pottery into your hand, painted in faded red wavy lines, once probably symbolic. It's cool and rough and heartbreakingly light. This was water, he says. Now it's just color. Yet not everything was lost. You pass a small field green, improbably alive, where a few families still farm using terrace methods. They've patched canals, reinforced walls, passed quipu knowledge through whispered memory. It's not grand. It's not a monument. But it works. One fringe theory even suggests that some Inca engineers deliberately obscured certain water paths and terrace mechanisms booby-trapped against misuse, or simply hidden awaiting rediscovery. Whether it's true or not, the fact people hope it's true says a lot. And still the terraces wait. Not dead. Not gone. Just resting. You watch a boy drop seeds into small furrows he's cleared with a stick. He hums something low and ancient. His grandmother watches from the shade, her hands working knots into a bit of colored yarn. The conquest happened, but it didn't erase everything. You realize the stonework is still here. The mountains are still here. The people are still here. And beneath the dust, the breath of the terraces lingers faint, patient, waiting to be heard again. You return years later, older, quieter, and more curious than ever. The air is still thin, the sunlight still fierce, but something's changed. Not the mountains, they're eternal. What's different is the hum. Not metaphorical this time, but real. Solar panels glint on a nearby hut roof. A drone buzzes overhead, mapping contour lines. A local teenager adjusts a pipe valve hooked to a gravity-fed tank, then texts something on a weather-worn phone. You've come back to a terrace that was abandoned for decades, but now it's breathing again. The movement started small, just a few families reclaiming ancestral plots. They cleaned the canals, rebuilt the walls, hauled up new soil. It was hard, painful, often slow. But little by little, terrace by terrace, they resurrected the mountain's memory. Today, the village is alive. Children run beside irrigated furrows. Elders teach terrace geometry with sticks and pebbles. School books lie beside quipas, the past and future, touching knot by knot. One young farmer invites you to help plant again. You press your fingers into the black earth, warm and familiar, and you swear the soil remembers you. You laugh, probably the altitude, or the nostalgia. Or maybe the land really does whisper. The terraces still look ancient. But listen closely, and you'll hear the present woven in plastic-lined cisterns, experimental crop rows, hand-dug test patches comparing water retention. This isn't nostalgia farming. It's innovation with memory. A local cooperative has mapped the old irrigation routes with satellite data. Another team experiments with native seed strains once thought lost. One woman even uses a digital quipu app to track harvests. It's clunky, beautifully clunky, and yet not everything's high-tech. A grandmother still chews coca and blesses the water before it's released into the canals. Teenagers still stomp chuño under the stars, and every new stone set into a terrace wall is pressed the old way, by feel, by weight, by hand. You sit at the edge of one such terrace, legs dangling over a cliff that drops into cloud. Around you, nothing but stacked green shelves layered like ancient code across the bones of the world. And you know something quietly profound. The Inca never lost. Not really, because here on these stubborn slopes among stones that flex and walls that breathe, the mountain still farms, and the people still listen.
Isa kini sa kai tai tai si tai goi.
Now, let your breath slow. Let your shoulders soften. The terraces don't rush, and neither should you. The soil is still warm from the day's sun, and the air is full of the scent of dry herbs and wet stone. You're lying in the arms of a garden built by time, watched by stars that once told farmers when to sow and when to rest. You're safe here. The walls won't fall. They're built to sway, not to break. Like you. And as the night deepens and the earth hums softly beneath you, remember sometimes to survive the hardest seasons, you don't need to be the strongest. You just need to hold your shape. Good night.